Good morning. This is Anna Patterson with the North Carolina Housing Coalition. Thank you for joining us this morning for our housing call. And without further ado, I will turn it over to our Executive Director, Samuel Gunter.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Anna. Well, there's a lot to talk about, y'all. It has been a week. Before we get into our regular housing updates, I'm going to say a couple of words about the election that just took place this last week. But I'm going to say more words at a future date. I want you to keep an eye out. We're going to be doing an election impact webinar in the coming weeks. Once we get all of the races called, there are still votes being counted, both here in North Carolina, in addition to provisionals and all of that, as well as votes around the country. The House is not yet called in D.C., so we don't have the full scope yet of what the landscape is going to be in 2025. But we do know that there will be some significant shifts in the political landscape nationally, and trying to figure out what that means for housing policy moving forward. We'll do a bit deeper of dive in the coming weeks. So I'll say a few things about the election on this call, but I'm going to talk a lot more in much further depth at a later date. So know that. So on the election, at a state level, there are a couple of key things that have shifted, that will shift the dynamic somewhat coming into 2025. First of all, we will have a new governor in Josh Stein, and that team is beginning to form. Their transition team is starting to interview folks beginning next week for what the new governor's administration is going to look like. There is a link to the transition team's webpage if you are interested in being a part of that transition. Housing will be a big part of the agenda of the incoming governor's team. And so if that's something that you want to have an impact on, there's a place on their transition website to send your resume. One of the other dynamics at the statewide level that is significant is that the state Democratic Party flipped the right amount of seats to just break the supermajority, the veto-proof supermajority in the House. It's a small thing that isn't actually a big thing that will impact what the landscape looks like come 2025. So that's something we're going to be talking about a little bit more. But while the governor's mansion stays, there will be a different governor. It stays with the same political party. And the only shift in the House is the breaking of that veto-proof supermajority, which is a significant thing that will impact some of the dynamics coming up. And again, we will talk in more depth at a future webinar as we do like a deeper dive into the election and what that means for housing coming into 2025. The other news from around the state in the election, there were 4 housing bonds on the ballot. And if you've probably heard me say that we've never had a housing bond lose or pass with less than, I think 64% of the vote was the lowest tally for a housing bond. That streak is now broken. 3 bonds did pass. Asheville passed a $20 million bond, Chapel Hill passed a $15 million bond, and Charlotte passed a $100 million bond. But Cary voted down its $30 million bond measure. You can see we have a link on here for how other bond measures and other housing measures fared across the country. And you can check that out in a link, 6 particular housing-related measures that are worth looking into. So those are kind of the high level from the state. We have a new governor. We'll have a new governor coming into 2025 who is building a team. They are looking for folks to participate in that team. They're taking applications on their transition team's website, and we have broken the supermajority veto-proof supermajority in the House has been broken, which may mean vetoes might be upheld that our new governor might issue. So that's kind of where the state dynamic is. Again, we'll do a deeper dive later. Nationally, obviously, there's a party flip in the White House, and it remains to be seen what that impact is. We don't know. The Republicans have flipped the Senate at the national level, and we don't yet know where the House is going to be. It's going to be tight. And at the moment, it is looking like Republicans will hold on to the House, but not all the votes have been counted yet. So we'll do a deeper dive at a later date on what that means for housing policy. There will be a lot to say at that point, because I think there's, while there is a lot up in the air and unknown, and will remain unknown until the administration starts to take shape nationally, but the impact is going to be significant. And there are things that little tea leaves that we can read to get a sense of what's headed our way. I will say, as a reminder about who we are at the Housing Coalition, many of you have probably heard me say this before in a number of different contexts, but we exist as an organization because advocates and practitioners in the 80s in North Carolina and in states all across the country decided to join forces as the federal government backed out of a lot of housing investments, asking their states to step into the gap. That's what created us as an organization. And so as we look ahead to what the impact of this election might be on federal housing policy, on resources and how they flow, just keep that in the back of your mind, that the reason that we exist in the first place is because folks were taking a step back from housing investments, and we were trying to figure out how we could step into the gap. I'm gonna say more at a future date when we do a deeper dive on the elections. And right now, I'm going to turn to Hurricane Helene updates. Congress is in session. They returned today for a lame duck session, and they're going to be busy negotiating a disaster aid package in response to Hurricanes Helene and Milton. The word around D.C. is that they'll likely attach another continuing resolution to the disaster package and try to pass a spending bill in February or March of 2025 once the new Congress convenes. That's significant for reasons that we will talk about on a future podcast. At the state level, well, as a reminder, in the aftermath of Matthew and Florence, it took us almost 2 years to get to a CDBG-DR award for North Carolina, and we got about half what we asked for. So there are a lot of things flying around, a lot of advocacy that is happening in the background with our federal delegation, our congressional delegation, about making sure resources flow to North Carolina. There's talk about, and there's a campaign afoot right now to get mayors to sign on, in particular disaster-impacted mayors, to sign on to a letter to permanently authorize the Community Development Block Grant Disaster Recovery Program so that resources can flow more quickly in the aftermath of the disaster as we look ahead to long-term Helene recovery. So there's a number of things that you can see in the call notes around that. On the state side of the Helene updates, there's a couple of things that I want to draw your attention to. There are resources, and there's a database available that you can link to, resources to support Hurricane Helene recovery, and if you have any others that we're missing, please let us know. But there are some job postings open. The Office of Recovery and Resiliency, FEMA, and the CDC Foundation are all hiring for hurricane recovery positions in Western North Carolina, and I know that they are very interested in hiring folks from the western part of the state. So NCORE has disaster case manager jobs open, and those job postings close day after tomorrow, on Thursday the 14th. They have disaster case management navigator positions open. That job closes on the 19th. Disaster case management team lead, that job closes on the 19th. They want to hire people from the West. So if you're from the West, know folks in the West who are interested in being part of long-term recovery, there are positions open right now. FEMA as well is hiring recovery planning coordinators. That closes tomorrow on the 13th. They are hiring in Asheville, Durham, Hickory, Raleigh to support community recovery. They're being accepted online. You can search either through the link that we provide, or if you go to usajobs.gov and type FEMA local hire, enter North Carolina, and you'll find your way there. The CDC Foundation is also hiring evacuation shelter support program coordinators, local disaster support unit program coordinators, local health department response and recovery chief, local health department response and recovery deputy chief, mass fatality management program coordinator. There are a number of different positions open all around Hurricane Helene recovery. So if you are looking for work, looking to be a part of the recovery efforts long term, take a look at those job postings. A couple of other items to note on the recovery front. We have an NC General Assembly Joint Legislative Commission on Government Operations, or Subcommittee on Hurricane Response and Recovery. We generally call that GovOps. They're going to meet for a third round of disaster aid funding on the 18th at 1 p.m. You can find more information about that subcommittee meeting. They're probably going to be talking about the gap in funding for recovery from Florence and Matthew, as well as looking forward to Helene recovery as well. There are several items in the call notes around guidance to local governments in disaster-affected areas around local fiscal recovery funds and how they can be obligated to respond to the disaster. A big news item is the deadline to apply for FEMA individual assistance is now extended through January 7th. Again, this is the big funnel through which all future disaster recovery efforts will flow. If you have had any impact, sign up for FEMA individual assistance. You may not get approved for things right away, but any kind of recovery tied to your home, to your loss of work, all of it, it flows through FEMA individual assistance. Sign up for FEMA individual assistance. A couple of other items in here around eviction concerns in particular. We've been part of a number of groups calling for an eviction foreclosure moratorium of 90 days in the aftermath as evictions are moving forward in the West, despite the fact that the housing market jobs have been severely disrupted. So you can learn more about that in the link in the call notes. A couple of other events to take note of as we look ahead to the coming week. Bipartisan Policy Center is doing a webinar on the 19th about preservation, an essential guide to the Housing Affordability Challenge. We have a couple of webinars on strengthening renters' rights that NLIHC is doing. The save the date has gone out for NLIHC's policy forum, March 24th through 27th in DC. Save the date for that if you are interested. National Housing Task Force has released a federal housing policy agenda called From Crisis to Transformation that you may want to take a look at. NLIHC has also put out a report on habitability protections case studies that is really interesting right now. And Novogradac also has a piece out on the urgent need to prioritize preserving affordable rental multifamily housing. A couple of other news items, kind of potpourri here, is there's an article in the Business North Carolina about how churches, in particular, faith communities are being poised to help develop sorely needed affordable housing, talking about the impact of affordability of housing given the reality of climate change-driven insurance hikes. And then, again, another piece from NPR on millions of low-cost homes are deteriorating, which is contributing significantly to the U.S. housing shortfall. There's a whole bunch of other items that you can take a look at in the call notes. Again, the election is the big story, and the impact of that election on federal housing policy, federal housing resources, how they flow, where they flow, is significant. And we're going to do a much deeper dive on what tea leaves are out there to read about what is coming our way in 2025 and how we can respond and be a part of transformation and ensuring that there is sufficient affordable housing for folks. But we're going to schedule a webinar, look for a save the date over the next week to sit and reflect with us on what the election results mean for us at a federal level, at the state level, and at the local level. Again, thank you all for joining, and we will see you next time.